The 2024 NHL season, through all of its ups and downs, is officially over. And now in this offseason, the draft picks have been made, the free agents have signed, and most of the trades have been completed. So now we look towards the 2025 season, and today we're going to be ranking every single NHL team from worst all the way to the best. So make sure you hit that like button as we go through every single team and your team to see how they could do this next year. And hit that subscribe button if you're new for more hockey content just like this all throughout the offseason, because we're going to start pumping out stuff that you guys won't want to miss. But loading up the tier list here to rank every single NHL team, we're going to go through 5 different tiers here today. First, we got the Stanley Cup favorite, and this is an exclusive one, folks. Maybe 2, 3, maybe 4 teams at the max are going to go in this top tier for me. You got the Stanley Cup contender right below that, teams that I could see win the Stanley Cup in the end next year. Then you got the playoff teams right in the middle there, teams mostly in the 16 to 10 range, teams that I see making it, but likely not going on a deep playoff run. Then we got the 4th tier in the fringe teams, and unfortunately for these squads, just teams I don't see making it, being close and kind of being in that 85, maybe 95 point range, but not being able to make it. And then last but not least, the straight Garbo tier, where teams like Chicago will find themselves. And then last but not least, we got the straight Garbo tier, which, spoilers, the San Jose Sharks will find themselves in. And you know what? We're just going to go straight into it. We're going to put the San Jose Sharks as the first team in this list because it'll be the easiest team to rank. Starting us out here with the 32 teams, we're going to have the San Jose Sharks in the straight Garbo tier. As much as I would love to come on here and actually say the San Jose Sharks are Stanley Cup favorites, reality is going to hit them square in the face. Now, there's absolutely zero chance that the San Jose Sharks are as bad as they were last year. 19 wins, 47 points. There's just no chance of that happening again. You got the additions of Tyler Toffoli, Barclay Goodrow, Alex Wenberg on the forward group, and then you got the prospects as well coming up in Macklin Celebrini, Will Smith, Eklund, Bordeleau could also take that next step. I think the offense next year is actually not going to be too bad. It won't be good, but it won't be bad either. The defense, I think, will largely stay the same. I don't think Jake Wallman is going to make a humongous difference, even if I love the guy, and I do think he's a pretty underrated D, especially by Detroit. I don't think he's going to change that defense. It's still going to be pretty bad. Then you got the goaltending in Blackwood and Vanacek, especially in Blackwood's case. I thought he was extremely underrated last year. I thought could have been a pretty good addition for some team out there looking for a rental goalie, but in Blackwood's case, I think he'll be decent once again. For the Sharks, though, I see them improving, but more so being around the 65 to 70 point range, and still being a competent team, though nothing special. But still being in the dumpster enough to have another poor season, enough to get them a great chance at another first overall pick, which is exactly where San Jose should be. Now for this tier list, it's going in completely random order. Next up, we got the Vegas Golden Knights. Now, Vegas is really a weird team to predict because they had a lot of losses this offseason in players like Donovan Marchessault, William Carrier, Chandler Stevenson, Alec Martinez, and of course, the Logan Thompson trade. But I think what Vegas did really well this offseason was getting a lot of younger players like Victor Olofsson, Alexander Holtz, and Ilya Samsonov, who have yet to prove themselves but do have potential. Really, though, I think it all depends on that goaltending. Can Adin Hill really be steady as a starter another season? Will Ilya Samsonov be able to rebound in a big way? Or will he still have those weird, inconsistent, injury-riddled years? That'll be a big thing for Vegas because I think the defense and the top end forwards they have are still great when healthy. But because they were already pretty inconsistent last year and they turned a lot of their surefire players into maybes, I'm going to put Vegas just in the playoff team tier for now. Next up, we have the Columbus Blue Jackets, and I really don't see it being a great year for them. We know just how disappointing Columbus was last year, and I do think they will see some improvement. I could see them around the 70-75 point range with just the increases in production of Fantilli and some of the younger players. Their big free agent addition was getting center Sean Monahan. I think he will improve the overall forward group, and I guess you also have Jack Johnson there too. But to me, the defense is still rather weak, and especially health-wise, a little bit inconsistent, and the goaltending is just poor. I like Daniil Tarasov, but I don't think he'll immediately put up starter numbers, especially in the wake of Elvis Merzlikins and his continual disappointment. I mean, Columbus is still kind of in this transition period, but hopefully they can start improving just a little bit, and after this next year, that's when they can start being a playoff team with the youth fully on board. So yeah, unfortunately, straight Garbo for Columbus still. Next up, we go into the New Jersey Devils, and they're a team that I thought had a pretty complete offseason. I don't think they needed to make major surgery to the top end of the forward group, and they didn't. They really just tinkered around with the bottom 6, getting players like Stefan Noesen and Paul Cotter, guys that can really play hard in the bottom 6, especially Noesen, who is one of my favorites in the league, Plato, Texas-born native. You also got the defense too, which I think is pretty improved, getting Brett Pesce, also Brennan Dillon, who I think is going to be an underrated physical force in that bottom pair. But then, of course, you have the biggest addition in Jacob Markstrom, who I'm a big fan of, had a really underrated season last year. year, made Calgary a much better team than they would have been. In terms of goals they would have expected, has been one of the best goalies over the past 3-5 seasons. He's somebody that I think could really change New Jersey's goaltending and turn it from a weakness to a strength. And Jake Allen, especially as a backup, is a pretty great one. And I do think they negated some of the issues with lack of experience with a lot of those additions, and Jacob Markstrom especially, I think, will be huge for them. They aren't quite in the favorite tier, but because of some of those reasons, I see New Jersey rebounding and being a Stanley Cup contender. Next, we go to the Chicago Blackhawks, and honestly, I could see a situation where Chicago maybe even gets up to the fringe teams tier. They're a team that I thought had a really good offseason in terms of just pure additions. Now, hopefully this time around, they have a healthy Taylor Hall that can actually play for them throughout the season. That'll be an addition for them. You also got Tyler Bertuzzi and Teuvo Teravainen on the forward side from free agency. I think those two guys will just add some great depth all around. Defensively, you also got the additions of Alec Martinez and TJ Brody, and they got one of the best goaltenders available in the entire free agency period, getting Laurent Brossoit, who is about as good of a backup as you could possibly get. I can honestly see him being the starter next year at points, with Mrazek maybe having some inconsistencies. Brossoit can come in and steal some games, and I think he will do that for Chicago. Still, though, I think most likely Chicago is in the garbage tier, but more on the outside of it, less being the worst team in the league and more being around the 5th last spot. I could see Bedard taking another big step as well and starting to look like the franchise centerman that Chicago needs. Next up, we go to the Tampa Bay Lightning, and I think for a lot of people, this might be the year that a lot of them predict them to miss the playoffs, to finally end their streak, but I do think there are some things for Tampa that are promising. First, you get a little bit younger, going with Jake Gensel as one of your top players, really replacing him with Steven Stamkos. I think there are situations where that could be better for Tampa in the now and long term too. And you're also looking at the defense too, and I do think it is improved, getting better depth, bringing back McDonough, and also JJ Moser as an underrated bottom pair piece. To me, having the defense could actually be decent next year. But the big thing that I think keeps Tampa in the playoffs is the prime still of Andre Vasilevsky, of now Jay Gensel, of Nikita Kucherov, of Braden Point. I just see those guys being too good for Tampa Bay to miss, though I could see a situation where just because of the age with some of their depth pieces, that's just too much to handle. But I still think for Tampa, they're a playoff team in the end, just barely. Next, going to the LA Kings, and they're a team that I have a pretty big hot take for, and they're a team that I see missing the playoffs next year. It's for a couple of reasons here. One of them is that I think just the over-reliance on their older players like Kopitar and Doughty, I think could really bite them in the butt next year. I also don't really love that goaltending for them. Darcy Kemper has not been good for a while, and I don't see him being a sizable upgrade, if any at all. And I just feel like with how many upgrades were made in the Western Conference in general, I think the LA Kings is going to be on the outside looking in. Next up, though, we go on to the Washington Capitals, who, if they made no additions in this offseason, I would have been easily in the fringe tier, but they're a team that had a pretty strong one. Of course, had the forward additions in Dubois, Mangiapane, Taylor Radish, Brandon Duhaime, and then on the defense, Jacob Chychrun and Matt Roy. Matt Roy especially, who I think is a major addition for them and somebody that I think the Kings will miss as well. And on the goaltending side, Charlie Lindgren was excellent last year, and you get Logan Thompson too, who I'm a big fan of when healthy. I think the Capitals did a great job of keeping themselves in the playoff conversation, and I do think they end up making it in the end. Next up, we go to the Toronto Maple Leafs, and they're a weird team to talk about, mostly because they didn't make the offseason trades that we thought they would make. Mitch Marner is still a Leaf and likely will still be a Leaf on opening nights, but on the defense, you got Chris Tanev, you also got Oliver Ekman-Larsson, and I do think those are two big additions. But the big problem for Toronto really over these past couple of seasons is that they haven't been scoring when they've needed those big goals, and I think that will be still a problem for the Leafs in the end. But I still see them being a playoff team and still see them being one of the better ones. Next up, we go on to Utah, and they're a team that I honestly could see surprising a lot of folks. You already have a great core there forward-wise in players like Keller, Cooley, Krause. Gunther is going to be there for the full season, which I think will be big for them. Matthias Michelli, Josh Doan. But I think the big additions on the defense will really propel them forward. You got Mikhail Sergachev, who will hopefully be fully healthy next year. John Marino, who I think will have a rebound season there too. And on the goaltending side, you could kind of take it or leave it, but I'm a big fan of what Connor Ingram was able to accomplish last year. If he has the same kind of type of season next season, I think Utah's going to be in a great position to contend. And I think they will, honestly. Call me crazy, but I think in their first year, they're going to be a playoff team, and I am so sorry for Coyotes fans. Next up, going on to my favorite team in the Dallas Stars, they're definitely going to be in the Stanley Cup favorite tier. Even though I think they made lateral moves, especially on the defense, they're still a team that is built for success with the top-end players they have, and the depth, especially in the forward group, is still intact. It's still incredible, and I think it'll still be a major strength going forward. Next up, we go into the Detroit Red Wings, and they're a hard team for me to personally rank. I really wanted to see them make major additions this offseason, especially on the defense and the goaltending side, but they really didn't do that. In fact, I think defensively, you can make a case that they got worse course, trading Jake Wallman and getting a player like Eric Gustafsson back. And on the goaltending side, you got Cam Talbot, who I think could be okay at best, but I think at best, Alex Lyon will still have to absolutely carry them on the goaltending side. I think they could have used a Jacob Markstrom addition, could have used a big addition on that defense to really solidify themselves, but they just didn't do that. There is still time to make additions, but as of right now, I'm going to put them on the fringe, though I hope to be wrong on this. Next up, we go on to the Calgary Flames, and to me, they're a pretty easy team to rank, honestly. I see them being in the garbage tier, but this is exactly where they should be. I kind of see them being more in the Chicago territory, where they're more in the 75s, maybe 80-point range. Not truly horrible, but I mean, Calgary, this is the time to start getting some really good picks. You, of course, got Zane Prek in the last draft, but hopefully the rebuild starts in Calgary, and it really looks like it will. Not a lot of additions, and quite a few subtractions over the last year. Next up, we go on to the Carolina Hurricanes, and you can make the case that they could be in the Stanley Cup favorite tier, but I'm going to put them in the contender tier for now. Mostly it's because I think you can make the case they got worse than they were last season. You, of course, aren't able to keep Jay Gensel, who I thought was a critical addition for them at the deadline and really propelled their offense. You got Jack Roslovic instead, who didn't really work out for the Rangers. I don't really see him working out for the Canes. You got the defense, and I like Sean Walker, but I think he's pretty similar to what Brett Pesce brings, and of course, he goes on to the New Jersey Devils. And goaltending-wise, it's the exact same. I think Gotchkov will be in a better position next season, but I don't think he'll rejuvenate that team goaltending-wise. I think they could have also gone for a major goaltender, but they didn't. Now on to the Vancouver Canucks, and I think they're a team that also deserves to be in some of those top tiers of how they proved themselves this last year. I see them being around the same range. I think the Jake DeBrusk signing is a fantastic one for Vancouver. I think he'll be the perfect line mate alongside Elias Pettersson, and I also think defensively they're in around the same spot. Desharnais and Forbort will bring some good physicality, and of course, hopefully Demko will have another great season ahead of him. I think Vancouver, though, of how they set themselves up for success, you can make the case that they could drop back down to reality. But I think with how their top end players play, with the goaltending, if it's able to stay healthy, I still think Vancouver will be a solid team next year. But especially with how they prove themselves, you got to put them in the contender spot. Now on to the St. Louis Blues, and they're another team that I think is pretty easy to rank. They're going to be in the fringe. I think they're going to be kind of similar to what they were this last year, but I think this last season they were really carried by Jordan Binnington having a stellar rebound season after a couple of disappointing years. But I think honestly the forward group might be a little bit improved. They really revamped the depth there. I think it could prove to give them some more goals, but I still think the defense is rather weak, and I just don't think they have enough top end talent to put them over the edge. But they'll be one of those teams that could potentially sneak in and get there as a 92, 93 point team. Next up, we go on to the Boston Bruins, and they're a team I don't think you can ever truly count out. I do think they kind of were strange in some of the free agency decisions they made, but I don't think it will hurt them this next year. I think it'll be solid. Getting Lindholm and getting Zadorov, those are two big guys for them, and still Jeremy Swayman as a starter of the future is what the direction they should be going towards. I don't think they're going to be an incredible team, but I still think they will be in the playoff race, still being right there in the thick of it. Next up, we go on to Philly, and they're a team that surprised me a ton this last year, and of course, they're adding Matvei Michkov. There isn't a ton of big decreases. You, of course, have Carter Hart going off the team for very serious reasons, but you add Matvei Michkov, who I think is going to be absolutely brilliant for them, and I think that will be the major addition. But I think they'll be largely the same. Still in the fringe, not quite garbage tier, but unfortunately not quite good enough to make the playoffs. Next up, we go on to the Florida Panthers, and they're another team that is pretty easy to talk about. They're going straight in the Stanley Cup favorite tier. Not really much of a discussion there. I'm not sure if they win the Cup next year because I think they lost quite a bit on the defensive side, but they're still one of the favorites out there, for sure. Next up, we go on to the Minnesota Wild, and they're a team that I also see kind of being in that Philadelphia Flyers range tier. Not good enough to make the playoffs, but not good enough to be truly garbage. I think it's boosted by Kirill Kaprizov, Brock Faber, Matt Boldy. You have a decent core there outside of Kaprizov, but I don't think it'll be enough to truly propel them. I still see the goaltending being a little bit inconsistent, and just the depth throughout the roster not being what it needs to be. For Minnesota being in no man's land, which is where their franchise has always seemingly been. Next up, we go on to the Colorado Avalanche, and they're a team that honestly I could see not being as strong as this last year, declining once again, mostly because of the complete lack of depth. I mean, out of any team out there, I think Colorado is the one that decimated the most by cap space. And really a lack of it. I mean, you look at their depth, they got Nikolai Kovalenko on their second line. They're going to have Parker Kelly, Chris Wagner, and Joel Kiviranta. On the defense, I think they are decent. I could see Eric Brandstrom performing well there. But goaltending-wise, I'm not a big fan of Georgiev. Onion, I think, could have another good season. Hopefully, having another solid season after the second half performance they had this last year. But I just think the depth will be a major issue for them, especially if Valery Nichushkin is a part of their team, if Gabriel Landeskog isn't a part of their team. They will be extremely thin. I still see them making the playoffs, but don't be surprised because of the lack of depth, they have a hard time making it. Next up, we go on the Montreal Canadiens, and they're pretty unchanged compared to last year, but I think that some of the improvement will just be because of those younger players in Slafkovsky and Caulfield and Suzuki and Kirby Dach, hopefully, finally, knock on wood, being healthy next year. And of course, Elaine Hudson doesn't hurt either. I still think they'll have to wait another year to actually be a complete fringe team to be right up there in the playoff race, but I could see them being in there for a couple months throughout the year, but just making steady improvement, likely being around the 80-85 point pace. Next up, we got another team here that I think will be in the playoff race again in the Winnipeg Jets. They're a team that I think is pretty simple of how they'll go about next year. It's not too much change. Really, the big addition is getting Scott Arnold as full-time head coach there in Winnipeg, but I don't think it's going to make too much of a difference considering he was already one of the coaches there on that staff. With Connor Hellebuck still at the top of his game and some of the star players they have there still in Scheifele and Morrissey and Kyle Connor, I still think it'll be pretty hard to miss the playoffs. Unless there's some major injury issues, I still see them being a playoff team. Now we go into the New York Islanders, and another team like Winnipeg that isn't too changed, but I do think the Anthony Duclair signing was an absolutely brilliant one. Honestly, one of the best of this offseason. But I do think the Islanders will be a victim of just the competitive playoff race in the East. And even though I like the Duclair signing, there are still some issues on that team, especially defensively and with the top end talent they have that I think will kind of limit them in the end. I think Patrick Gall will still have a good effect for that team, but I still think they'll be around the 90-95 point range. And I think there's a good chance that they end up missing. Right now, I'm going to have them on the outside. Honestly, same thing goes with the Ottawa Senators. I see them making some good improvements. I think the Linus Ullmark deal is brilliant for them, and hopefully he'll finally, again, knock on wood, solve the goaltending issues. And you can make the case that because of that, they could be in the playoff race, that they could finally end up making it. But again, I think that stacked Eastern Conference is really going to fight with them. I think it's honestly between them or a team like Tampa and Washington getting in, but I do see them just being on the fringe, kind of like the Islanders, just barely not making it. I did like some of the additions like David Perron and Noah Gregor onto that bottom six, but I still think the big holes come defensively. I like Nick Jensen, but I don't think he's going to save that defense by any means, and it's still going to be pretty weak all around. That, to me, I think will hold them back. Now we go to the Seattle Kraken, and they're a team that honestly you can make the case could maybe improve a little bit. You got the Chandler Stevenson, Brandon Montour additions, but I still think they'll be on the outside. I just think that goaltending is still rather weak, and they just don't have the top-end talent, man. That's the big thing for me. Besides maybe Vince Dunn, who I think is their best player, forward-wise, they just don't have a lot there, and a lot of top-end talent that can make a big impact. To me, I still see Seattle being on the fringe, but more so towards the back of the pack, towards Minnesota. Next up, we go to the Anaheim Ducks, and I think they're pretty squarely in the straight garbage tier. I think they have at least another year of being in the dumpster before they really turn that page. Cutter Gauthier is going to be a ton of fun having there for his first season, but I still think they have a little bit of problems depth-wise. Playing Ross Johnston in 2025 is going to be absolutely crazy to me. And defensively, they did get Brian Dumoulin, I guess, but he's pretty fine at this stage in his career at best, and I don't think he's going to really solve the defensive issues there really throughout the entire roster. I think defensively, this team is going to be pretty rough, though a lot more fun to watch than in prior seasons. And I think at this point in their rebuild, that's what matters. Next up, we go to the Buffalo Sabres, and they're a team that didn't have the craziest offseason in the world, but I honestly see being a playoff team in the end. I just think with the improvements naturally throughout the roster, we're going to see them have a better season. I'm starting to see the vision a little bit with their bottom six additions, going for speed, going for bang and crash players like Sam Lafferty, Beck Melenstein, Nicholas Aube-Kubel, even Ryan McLeod, who I think will be a great third line center for them. I do think defensively they could have gone for another D, but I could see why they wouldn't. And then you have the goaltending side in Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen, who was great in the first half of last year, and Devon Levi, who I think will be a full-time starter next year. He had the struggles last season, but I think this next year we'll see him really rise and really show himself for Buffalo. Next up for the Edmonton Oilers, they're going straight in the Stanley Cup favorite tier. Their offseason was actually pretty interesting. I really like the forward additions and Jeff Skinner and Victor Arvidsson. A lot of potential offense being brought there. I do think there are still issues defensively throughout the roster, but I do think offense makes up for it. And like last year, they're a lot better built for a team. You could see how they proved themselves as a complete unit, and I think they'll stay around that range next season. Now, next up, we got the Nashville Predators, and they're a team that throughout this entire offseason was going absolutely ham with the trades, with the free agent signings, Stamkos, Marchessault, just everybody they got on the roster. It was insane, the additions they made. I also think with the hopeful improvements of UC Saros getting back to true form, Nashville's going to be a really strong team next year. Long term with the contracts they signed, there might be some issues there, but I think Nashville's honestly potentially in the Stanley Cup contender tier. With how much they improved last year, with with how much they improved this offseason and UC Saros being there, don't count out Nashville. There are some problems still having defensively, but honestly, I could see a situation where Nashville really surprises a lot of people like they did last year and continues to improve. Now we got the New York Rangers, and I see a lot of people out there putting them in just like the playoff teams tier or even potentially missing the playoffs. I think that is insane. I think the Rangers still deserve to be a Stanley Cup contender. Sure. Did they make sweeping changes? No. And I do think they could have made some sweeping changes that could have improved, especially the 5-on-5 roster, but I do think they're still going to be a great team next year. Igor Shesterkin, Adam Fox, the top end players they have there. There are still some incredible talents, and you will have the improvements in Hedl and Alexis Lafreniere there as well, in players like Keandre Miller. I still think the Rangers are going to be strong. Will they win the Cup? Probably not, but they're still going to be a competent team. Next up, we got the Pittsburgh Penguins, and they're going straight in the fringe tier to me. They're a team that kind of is just the opposite of Washington. It's pretty crazy to see these two teams parallel each other. You have Pittsburgh, who just fails to make creative decisions and fails to get themselves out of this hole. Meanwhile, you have Washington wheeling and dealing, getting Pierre-Luc Dubois, changing their entire roster, getting Logan Thompson, making all these additions onto this youthful core, and you could see the difference in these two teams. I think Pittsburgh is heading towards the down while Washington is heading towards the up, and in Pittsburgh's case, even though they still have the top end guys like Crosby and Letang and Malkin, I just don't see the supporting cast there good enough to make it work and be a playoff team. I'm sorry. Now, looking at everything here, I'm going to make a couple of adjustments. I'm going to put New Jersey in the Stanley Cup favorite tier, just to have another team in the East in that tier. I'm also going to have Tampa Bay back in the fringe teams, just to make sure that there's 8 slots for the East and 8 slots for the West in the playoffs, just to make it as even as I possibly can. I think Tampa is probably the most likely out of the teams I had here in the East to be out of the playoff race, just because of natural aging and potentially the defense still not being good enough to complete a full season. We'll see what ends up happening, but I think this is going to be my list for this year. Obviously, there's still stuff to change this offseason. We could still see some more trades, but this is how I'm seeing the NHL as of right now. Let me know down below, guys, what do you guys think of my list? What do you agree? What do you disagree with? And where do you see your team placing out of all of the 5 tiers here? I would love to know your thoughts down below. Of course, make sure you hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell if you haven't already, and comment down below all your thoughts. Share the video with all the hockey fans you guys know online, and then click on this card for all of my rankings content right in one playlist. My name is Nathan, and I hope you have a fantastic hockey day. I will see you in the next one, and goodbye.